Welcome to Fun and Games Side Quests. Every episode is a different host sharing a video game they love and why they love it.
Hey there everybody, this is Brogan Chattin. You can just call me Bro. I'm honored to be your guest today on Side Quests. I am the host of a podcast called the Daydreamcast, which I co-host with a friend named Murph. We banter and we joke, but we also analyze games. There's a topical gaming section, a variety segment, and a mostly retro game of the week that we dive deep into. It's loads of fun, but that's not why I'm here today. I decided to dedicate my episode on a game I love called Cave Story. It was a game originally released in late 2004. It was developed over 5 years by a single-person developer, Studio Pixel and Nicalis. I hope I pronounced that right. This is a hard game to place for me. I'm only 29, but the bigger problem here is this game's release was originally freeware. And it was also originally in Japanese and only Japanese, though there were eventually English translation patches. And it got official releases afterwards for other consoles in Cave Story Plus, and it even got like a real 3DS remake, which I've never played. I'm pretty sure for me, I was really getting into gaming and online discourse into 2008 and 2009 as I was becoming a teenager. This had a lot of buzz to it, and especially if you were in any online list rankings or free games, which I was all about, you'd be able to find people praising this game. It was a critical darling. And I for sure downloaded it at some point before the WiiWare release, but I would probably be confident in saying that the WiiWare release for me was when I was able to sit down with a controller and beat the game. And especially since on the PC original version, you're using a keyboard. The keyboard's hard to do. That's just is not easy. I think to convey its immediate appeal historically before we talk about the game, it pops in my brain as the quintessential indie game. And nowadays, I guess, if you ask me what an indie game is, maybe I would just say some generic roguelike Metroidvania or something. The first time indie games for me had meaning was the whispers about Cave Story. And that's not to say one-man indie games didn't exist before that. People making things in their garage since the dawn of time, I guess. But when I was a teenager, the auteur aspect really didn't click. But looking back, you can see what an indie game is based on Cave Story. You can see that the Cave Story is really the seed for a lot of what indie games and indie studios would do moving forward. It's a trailblazer in that sense. But what is the game? Basically, it's a retro-styled experience that was back when it was really novel. Here, it's less of an affectation of nostalgia. It's not doing something as just a generic callback, this is this game. It's just a practical reality for Studio Pixel, and best represents the gameplay and influences. Again, remember, one man, and it was originally free. You play as a robot named Quote, who basically wakes up in a giant island cave system, with its own deep lore, and you got to go through different level segments shooting enemies. It's a platform shooter, similar to Contra or Mega Man or cough cough Metroid like Samus when her shooting, but it doesn't really play like any of that. It actually was considered during its time to be a Metroidvania. You could look it up right now. Wikipedia, it says it's a Metroidvania, or a bunch of lists at the time would consider it such. And that's an interesting concept. I think back then the term was in its infancy and was developing and adapting its definitions. This is not a Metroidvania by any modern standards, and really only has some very specific bare Metroid influences. I just don't think we had the language at the time or now to really appreciate what the game was doing as a genre. Back in 2004, I highly doubt anyone was like, let me make a Metroid or Symphony of the Night clone. That came later. Open world platformers with interesting progression based on abilities and all that yada yada came before and after Metroid and Castlevania. And this sort of, rigid what makes a genre thing didn't come until later. Needless to say, what you'll mostly actually be doing is going through specific stages set up and directed for quote. They're dressed within the story and they feel a bit seamless and organic than a pure left to right platformer. It is very narrative focused and it feels organic in the narrative sense that you're being pushed to these things. And, there's times you'll be going back and forth between areas and within an area. And that makes for some interesting level geography where you have to go backwards or, back and forth. And really a lot of it is informed by also some minor adventure game, Zelda-esque game elements. Maybe you're going right and you'll see that a door needs opened. Sometimes you got to look in a corner for a computer terminal to turn something on, or maybe you'll collect a recipe from enemies in the world to return to that door. It is always easily communicated, at least from somewhere like an NPC or a sign. And I think that's super essential. The game is, you won't get lost or confused with these elements unless you're trying for something very specific. What I like about the level design, especially in regards to upgrades, is it does the Metroid thing of like the flat buffs to your character. There are these heart upgrades and missile upgrades throughout the levels that are like a little Samus E-Tank or a missile upgrade. And they add to your maximum HP or maximum missile count. And that's worth it in this game. These numbers add up fast. And they're also not fully located in hidden spots. There's some of that. And especially like in the quests themselves, like you'll have to scour a little bit. There's some good secrets, but there's also built in a lot of just general risk and reward of small challenges. Maybe if you risk for these upgrades, you can die. An easy example early on is this white wave that goes back and forth across the screen on one of the levels. All you have to do is time your jumps and running to get the upgrade. The game is pretty open about presenting threats in isolation to teach the player in a safe environment before moving onward to punish you. That first real level with the waves, the wave goes back and forth at the bottom of the level. Instead of a bottomless pit, it's just a floor. It tells you how forgiving platforming can be, but then if you take it for granted, you get punished with the one-hit kill wave. The risk and reward elements pervade the entire game. Confrontation is a thing you engage with on your terms at points. There's entire fights you can skip if you're uninterested in them, and endings you can skip if you're not interested in the challenges offered by the late game. Even the weapons are formed in a risk-reward way. Finally, I am talking about the weapons in gunplay. So basically, you're going to find weapons at certain times. Let's say you find a pistol. The pistol in this game is called the Polar Star. It's a little pea shooter, but as you shoot enemies, they're going to drop little orange triangles. I think people, at least I used to joke and call the little orange triangles Doritos. You collect the little Doritos and it's going to level up your gun. It's not a lot. It's not an extensive RPG or anything, but let's say, 12 Doritos to level 2. And it caps at 3. And each level has its own damage and, how the weapon functions. If you've got a rocket launcher, it's going to change how many rockets you shoot. The Polar Star will shoot 2 bullets at once in a Gradius way when it's level 2. And then when it's level 3, it's going to become this really chunky beam. It just really damages enemies. Now, the risk reward comes into play with the fact that some of the weapons really function innately differently between levels, like the blade, to where you're going to want one specific level over another. And when you take damage, the weapon levels down. Just like a really bad 2 seconds, and you can go from a fully powered level 3 Polar Star back to your little level 1 pea shooter Polar Star because you messed up along the way. And this system really creates a delicate balance in your weapon select. You're going to be juggling the different weapons based on effectiveness and need. But also, you got to take Doritos for your weapons at times. Like, oh my gosh, I got an enemy. Now I gotta run over there, switch to the weapon that I need XP on. Boom, boom, boom. And it's just fantastic. There's a lot of small decisions that really make the moment-to-moment jumping and shooting feel alive and pop. And to go back to the story and progression really quick, your weapons and progression are also built in based on your engagement with the story. You're going to be given opportunities at different points in time to turn in your weapons or trade them to get others, or you can keep the weapon you have. You can get a machine gun, or do you want a jetpack, or do you want a better jetpack later by not getting that jetpack? You can't have all this stuff in a single run, and that requires sacrifice of one thing or another, or the patience to hold on to something bad or deal with something bad until you get something better later. Sometimes the plot elements also require you to pay attention and engage with the world, but it's never particularly obtrusive. In fact, I would say that going in blind, you'd mostly find out about what you missed after you beat the game. And then you look it up and you realize, oh, I can do this. Or, oh, I didn't know if I did this would happen. That to me is so cool for this. It makes the world feel alive and makes the story work really well. I also think in an artistic sense, the game is really good about its visuals and its music. It's a beautiful game, even by today's standards, even if you shift it to the old graphics, if you're playing Cave Story Plus, or you're listening to the old music or the new music, it just feels and looks great. No matter what you do in 2023, Cave Story for me does not feel outdated. It's not really held back by tech of its time, but rather was designed with what made the games it looked at as inspiration and looked at what those design principles were to make them work. It's just fundamentally good design. The characters have this really nice balance between charming and mature. It's this cutesy style with a deeper tragic backstory. And I think the game wants to play with that dynamic too. The main village is a Mamiga village, and it's full of talking bunnies. So it's like all little cute bunnies, but then the conflict you immediately are introduced to is the idea that they are being kidnapped and enslaved and turned into monsters if they're found at all. And there's that little horror element to it. And the villains you fight have this nice Saturday morning cartoon blend of slapstick with a little bit of serious that really represents the balance of the game's tone. It's light and playful, but it knows when to get heavy for real impact. I especially appreciate the amnesia robot stuff regarding Quote. Quote is teased, very early in the game to be a soldier from the surface. And, you have a partner that also doesn't remember you named Curly Brace. It's a girl robot, very clearly your counterpart. But the dynamic between you two to figure out the memories and what's really going on is really charming. And I'm also underselling how hard the later portions of the game are. The game can get quite difficult, especially if you're going for the true ending. It's really a mix of platforming and gunplay to a specific balance. It gets hectic and overwhelming. I think I would say it's like if a platform shooter had bullet hell. It's not normal bullet hell. It's you're doing the bullet hell and there's a million enemies on screen, or it's a boss, or it's a really hard platforming segment with some enemies. And that, again, really hard to juggle, but very satisfying once you're in the zone. I guess to talk more about my memories and affection of it, I think I just love the fact that this is a game I can play and love it more every time I play it. It's a game I appreciate and respect, and especially a really clear example of, to me, what an auteur game could be, and the power of a retro-styled game that has its own identity. You can take specific parts and be like, oh, this is like that one game, but it's so clear, especially when you look now at how indie games function, and the specific mechanics that are meant to almost sell a game. It's like, oh, the game has to be this way because if it's not this way, it's not going to sell or it's not going to appeal. For me, this game, obviously because of how early it was and, the design principles behind it, it's not an elevator pitch of mechanics, but rather just a fully realized work on its own. And, for the writing, for instance, it's funny, but it's not very self-aware irony, that a lot of indie games will later have. It doesn't hold shame. It's also a game that's built up, especially in the public consciousness now, to be something almost mythical, but is actually really quick to downplay once you play the game. The story segments and nature of starting the game and the story want to draw you in and want you to have a good time. And maybe like, oh, this is cute and fun. And oh, yeah, you just completely forget about its legacy when you play it. And that's so awesome to me. And all of that, everything I just said, is why I chose this game. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this game with all of you. And I just gotta say, happy gaming.
This is We Burlesque.
Hi, this is Victor Vaughn, and I run the We Burlesque Podcast Network. I am currently in my
7th
season of the We Burlesque Podcast, which began, so many episodes ago. And I've been so delighted and intrigued to learn about our colleagues and our friends in the industry. So if you enjoy being a wallflower in the dressing room and hearing all about what we do, why we do it, and what's left to do, please go to Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google, Libsyn, and probably some other ones I don't even know about. Oh, we're on Audible now. How neat is that? We're on frickin' Audible. Oh, so go to your platform of choice, hit subscribe when you find We Burlesque. That's WEBURLESQUE. I should know how to spell it by now. So, or you can go to WeBurlesquePodcast.com. That's all one word. That's WEBURLESQUEPODCAST.com. Yeah, that should do it. Or on Instagram at WEBURLESQUE. That's it. Hi. So, anyway, be well, be safe, and let's talk.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.